Hey everyone, Nubkeks here. We're in week 2 of the Shadowlands right now, and of course, Mythic Plus, Arena, Raids, they're all on the very, very close horizon. I wanted to take the opportunity then this weekend to sit down and look at the different specs, or at least a few of the different specs, and see how they're doing. What are people enjoying? What is surprisingly fun? And what possibly are some of the disappointments as well? You know, I think this is especially relevant because people will be sort of settling down on the specs that they're going to be maining, that they're going to be taking into those weekly raids and getting that weekly loot. It's a pretty big decision, right? Or of course, you know, what's your alt going to be for people that are just now finishing up the leveling? That's a very real decision as well. So what I've done for this video is I've actually not only got some opinions of my own from the specs I've played, but I also talked to some of my guildies to get some insight into some of the specs they played. So let's dive in, let's see what they had to say. First up, a very pleasant surprise is Killer Energy, one of our mages, talking about the Fire Mage. As you guys probably know, I did rank Fire Mage as my least favorite ranged DPS spec from the beta, but it does seem like in the Shadowlands, thanks to some buffs, thanks to some tweaks, that things are actually looking a lot better than that. So Killer Energy said that Fire is actually surprisingly fun and well in tune with the Night Fae ability, making it very enjoyable to play. During pre-expansion, it kind of got overlooked as all the focus was going into Frost. One thing that I was very curious about was, you know, about hard casting Flame Strikes. There's a lot of risk to that, I think. You know, hard casting Flame Strike, it's a slow spell. You kind of want mobs to stand still in the flame patch. So I was kind of curious how that would actually play out, right? Could feel really bad in dungeons, especially if you're playing with a pug tank that's not going to play around Flame Strike. But if you're a bit more organized, maybe that feels a bit better. Anyway, Killer Energy said, yeah, with the flame patch talent, you actually start hard casting Flame Strikes at 2 targets. It is a bit iffy, but there's a point with enough haste. You can actually use Shifting Power as a hyper thread wrist wraps during combustion as well, which is really engaging gameplay. Definitely sounds very cool. He also says, you know, again, this is a great point, a really good point for you guys and how you should be thinking about fights and looking at fights, not only in raids, but also in dungeons. Any tough fight, even Torghast, you know, Sims don't take account of downtime and how you can use that. So, for example, Frost guides are going to tell you not to use Shifting Power in solo target, but in a fight like on Shriekwing, for example, during downtime, it's really good utility. You could cast that ability during your downtime, and it might net you 1 extra rune of power, 1 extra frozen orb during the fight, which could make actually a fairly substantial difference to DPS. That's a really good way to be looking at gameplay, right? Which is not something that you can really fit into a guide. It's more specific, but that's a really good way to think about how to min-max your spec. So yeah, Fire Mage. A lot of good things being said about Fire Mage. It's really definitely a surprise. Like Killer said, we'd overlook this spec a lot during the beta. Frost Mage is really the standout one, but Fire is doing a lot better. So guys, if any of you are playing Fire Mage, let me know. How are you enjoying it? I did a bunch of dungeons today with Killer, actually. He was playing Fire in some of them, and I think he topped the DPS meters. Like, he was absolutely blasting. So Fire's looking, if you excuse the pun, pretty hot right now. Jumping over to tanks then, Axtane, who has tanked on lots of different specs for us and has got lots of specs ready already in the Shadowlands. He's played 3 tanks so far, so these were some of his thoughts. He says, out of the 3 he's played, Vengeance is the most fun. It's a bit squishy at times, but it does a lot of damage on larger packs with Spirit Bomb and Decree. That's the Elysian Decree. That's the Kyrian Covenant abilities, like an extra sigil, like Sigil Flame, just big damage sigil that gives you some souls as well, which do feed into Spirit Bomb. He says Brewmaster feels solid in terms of defensives and healing. It doesn't get chunked like the other tanks do, and it's very fun. The damage, though, is underwhelming compared to the other 2 tanks that he's played. And then the 3rd tank he's played so far is Blood. Blood is a good balance between Brewmaster and Vengeance. It's got solid self-sustain and healing. Good damage if you use defensives right. You should never die. Hasn't played Guardian, but he hears they don't take any damage at all. They just don't dish it out either, a bit like Brewmaster. And interestingly enough, here's one disappointment. He says he's not excited to play Warrior since all the talent changes. It feels slow to me after all the talent synergy being removed, and the damage was nerfed too much. This is a pretty big deal. You know, Axe, I don't know. I would say for as long as I've known him, he obviously switched to Brewmaster raiding with us because we needed a Brewmaster, but I would say that Warrior BFA was probably his favorite spec, I think. So not liking Warrior in Shadowlands and finding it really unexciting, that's a pretty damning condemnation, I guess. He says, from what he's seen of Paladin, it's very much on par with Vengeance for damage and survivability. I personally wasn't a big fan of the playstyle in the pre-patch, so I wasn't excited to level my Pally. That's fine. It's not going to be for everybody. He did play Paladin for nearly 15 years, so he's sick of it. But yeah, if he says, if he's totally impartial, he can say it is better than Warrior. In terms of gameplay, it's right up there with Vengeance. So there you go, guys. A little bit of an insight into the tanks. For the most part, very good things to say about them, with obviously specs having strengths and weaknesses. I asked one of our hunters, Avia, how she was finding hunters so far, and a magician with words, she said pretty much exactly the same. I asked her if there's anything she could add for the folks on YouTube, and she said no, not really. But she did very kindly record a clip of her character dancing. So there you go, guys. Hunters, they're pretty much the same. I personally, you know what? I personally hate hunters so far in this expansion. I was innocently, very innocently trying to pick some herbs out while I was doing some world quests. I stopped to pick a herb, you know, not an evil thing. Very, very admirable, really. And I got hit by a sniper shot and a double tapped aim shot. In the course of about 1.5 seconds, I think my health bar was chunked down to about 30% health. I popped Dispersion on my Shadow Priest, and then the hunter just killed me through Dispersion. Yeah, that's my experience of hunters so far. So yeah, screw you hunters. I hate you guys. Bunch of bastards. I asked Tyr, who raided with us back in the Jaina raid in Battle of Dazar'alor, and he's come back for the Shadowlands. But he's playing a few different specs, so I asked him what his thoughts were on those. He started off talking about marksmanship. He says his insight is very limited because it's his first patch ever playing it, so he can't really say much about that one, unfortunately. But when it came to balanced Druid, which I personally rated very highly, I think I actually had them as my third best ranged DPS spec that I enjoyed the most, he said that he personally dislikes the new Eclipse system for balance, which seems to be an unpopular opinion, but I mean, it's still an opinion, right? And I've definitely heard other people say this for sure as well. For him, he felt that it was dumbed down, the rotation. It has good movement, good pooling. You can pool up your power and then spend your power and instant cast spells to do movement on Star Surges. But he said it made the spec feel less flexible, and the new Eclipses feel especially bad in world and dungeon content, that they're not as bad on bosses. The Starfall change is nice, but Starfall didn't really need a gameplay change, just a numbers tuning, so it was worth casting in AoE situations. Overall, though, he says the change feels good, it's a useful spell, so that's a good thing. Yeah, I think this is interesting. I actually do like, on the whole, I kind of like the change for Starfall because I think it's unique, personally. There are other spells in the game, like Blizzard, kind of, more so like Rain of Fire from Destrolox, that do a very similar thing to the old Starfall, which is, you know, Volley from Marksmanship Hunters, which is back as well. These sort of area effects, target them on the ground, and it's going to do damage, high damage over a short duration. So I kind of like that Starfall. Myself, I like that. It's different. There's no other spell quite like it, and it is reminiscent, of course, of that. What are they called? The hero unit in Warcraft 3? Tyrande, anyway. She could do that Starfall, which is, well, in that case, a channel. But yeah, you get the idea. I kind of like that old reference myself. But anyway, let's get back to what Tyr said. He's played some Resto Druid. It says, it feels the same. Nature Swiftness comes in clutch sometimes, is a good example of unimaginative unpruning. We already had Swiftman change back to interacting with our heals, as opposed to just an instant heal and a cooldown. So getting a second instant ability to interact with another spell seems kind of like unnecessary clutter. We could have got something more imaginative. He says, you know, it's very strong. You get instant reses with it. You can do an instant root and instant regrowth. It's very powerful. But yeah, I can see where he's coming from. You know, if they're out of all the possible new spells, all the creative things that could have happened. I mean, if you think about something like Symbiosis as a spell with loads of complexity, loads of gameplay to it, might have been more fun to have that come back than Nature Swiftness. I think that's fair. For some insight into healers, I talked to Mandua, who had played Resto Shaman with us for several tiers now, and he's switching it up in the Shadowlands. Although I have to say, I will jump in and say that I've been playing some Resto Shaman and it is still really enjoyable. In fact, I think it's probably more enjoyable. Really loving the Necrolord ability, Primordial Wave, myself with Resto Shaman. It's super badass. It puts a free Riptide on somebody, and then your next healing wave will also heal everybody with your, or a better way to think about it, when you cast a healing wave on someone, it will cast a free healing wave on every single person with Riptide on it. after you do the Primordial Wave. It's kind of insane. That's super fun. So Resto Shaman's great. Anyway, he switched off it. That's a little bit of a tangent. But he says for playing Monk, he's mostly played Mistweaver, and he's played a little bit of Windwalker, and so far so good. He'll see how build balance and variety with Nathria, when Nathria opens up, ends up. But potentially, he really likes the choice between Fist Weaving and regular healing. And the Night Fae Covenant ability spices things up a bit as well. That's one of the coolest Covenant abilities, the Monk one. The Phaline Stomp. Where you smash the ground and it shoots out this like kind of tree effect over the ground in these sort of semi-random patterns, and you can reset the ability if you fight while you're on the Phaline. So yeah, there's some really cool gameplay to that, and it looks absolutely awesome. He says for Paladin, he is very pleasantly surprised by Protection. Obviously went Kyrian with this thing, and it just plays amazingly. Just dabbled into Holy at the moment, and it's fine. Don't know how to feel about Holy Power. There's a cycle in the rotation, but I sometimes feel like I can't DPS anymore because I'm going to overcap on Holy Power. So I want to point out, last time I healed anything on Paladin was back in Legion. It was casual, so take this opinion with a grain of salt. Yeah, I definitely think there's going to be a big adjustment period for all Holy Paladins, really, because it is such a different spec. I mean, even over the course of the beta, it went from this very battle caster type gameplay, prioritizing Holy Shocks and Crusader Strikes, whereas now apparently they have much more of a focus on actually casting spells and using their Infusion of Light. So yeah, it's definitely one to keep an eye on. We'll see if they end up being strong. I mean, there's definitely a bit of concern, I think, that Holy Paladins aren't going to have good representation in the raid compared to, let's say, like Disc Priest or Resto Shaman, which are maybe going to be a bit better. We'll have to see. We have another mage, actually. Smoogle came in to give us some insight into Frost. He says, as someone who kind of gets the game, it's also a bit special at times. Frost is really fun at times. At the moment, with such shit stats, I feel like I'm sat casting Frostbolt for so long without a proc or anything. You just kind of start mindlessly pressing Frostbolt until you see flashes, then click the other two buttons and return. Yeah, that's definitely my criticism of Frost myself. That's why I rated it lower. Well, not lower, but mid-tier in my tier list, despite it being one of the most hyped specs in terms of power from the beta, is that it can feel a little bit too simple at times, just spamming Frostbolt and then press your procs when they light up. Interestingly, actually, some insight for Torghast. I've had a lot of people on the stream and in comments be asking about specs and Torghast and how they're doing. He says for Torghast, it really depends on whether you get good powers or not. I've done runs where I want to pull my hair out because I'm sad having to polymorph stuff purple because I have no chance pulling the full pack on my own. You can kite the whole pack, then you're stuck trying to keep the mobs away, and it's hard to get damage in. And sometimes it's a walk in the park if you get a power that's good. Hope this helps. So yeah, I mean, definitely that's probably the experience of several specs in Torghast. Sometimes, like for Shadow Priest, actually, the powers kind of suck, just in general. There's one that gives you a stacking damage buff to Shadow Word Death whenever you kill something with Shadow Word Death, and that has a huge impact, but the other powers are all kind of bland. But yeah, getting those strong powers versus not getting them can be a huge difference in how your run goes. Certainly in terms of how fast it is and how smooth it is, and how much fun you have. I think it can certainly affect it. But yeah, Frost, I think, yeah, like you said, it's nothing particularly new, I think, to anyone, Frost, because it's basically been the same since forever. Yeah, it's just spam your spells and hope you get good procs. It's simple but effective. It can be really frustrating when you don't get procs. Again, like you said, though, I mean, it's been almost the same spec for as long as I can remember, so I think we probably figured that already. You'll have already worked it out yourselves if you've played any Frost Mage at all so far. And then finally, I wanted to talk to Zed. So Zed has actually, he played Havoc Demon Hunter in Nyalotha with us. He's actually maxed 4 classes already, I think. Maybe 5? Certainly 4 when I asked him this. He might have done a 5th one since then because he's crazy. But he says they're all surprisingly fun. All of his specs, all the classes he's played have their own niche. So first of all, Sub-Rogue is a lot of fun when you can single target. But he says it's not that great in dungeons because of the trash pull sizes. And he'd probably have to switch to Outlaw on that to enjoy dungeons, even though he finds the Outlaw spec to be very dull. I have sort of similar feelings there as well, as you probably know from my tier list video I did before. It says Demon Hunters. So Havoc is the exact opposite. It's lots of fun for the most part in dungeons because they're great in AoE, but they severely lack single target damage and the rotation is still extremely basic. So the class is still carried purely by their mobility. Switching over to healers then, he's played Resto Druid. He says it feels very similar to BFA. They feel strong in dungeons and still almost impossible to run even when you're forced to spam. Their damage feels a bit underwhelming now though. and I think they've lost some of the utility advantage that set them above the rest in BFA dungeons because of the more corridor-based dungeon layouts. That's definitely an interesting thing to consider. Like, I had a bit of a concern coming into Shadowlands that Resto Druids getting Stampeding Roar as a baseline thing as well was maybe too much. They might have too much utility, but perhaps the dungeon design will actually somewhat counter that and give the other healers more of a chance when we go into those higher level keys. Plus also that damage being underwhelming is interesting. Mistweaver Monk, he says, seems stronger with more cooldowns, so it's mostly the same simplistic playstyle. Also seems to be a lot of important diseases that can be dispelled and important mobs that can be deleted with Touch of Death. So I think they'll be strong in the first season. They still have mana problems though. I think we'll see how that goes. The new change to mana food. Yeah, if you guys didn't hear about that, drinking water, right, getting your mana back from food in Shadowlands now ramps up, right? It takes a few seconds before you start regenerating good mana, so you might regenerate, I don't have the exact numbers, so let's say you'll generate 1% mana in the first second, then 2% in the next second, then 4%, then 8%, then up to like 10%, and then it stays steady at 10%, it plateaus. You get the sort of gist. It ramps up drinking, so just popping down and drinking for 3 seconds, it's nowhere near as effective in Shadowlands as it was in BFA. You have to sort of commit to drinking for longer to get the value. Anyway, he said, in terms of Torghast, Resto Druid was the easiest. They have some very synergistic choices, from powers I assume, to boost DPS in different ways. Demon Hunter was also quite strong. He says he had no problem with Rogue either, however, it was a bit slower due to a lack of self-heal. I actually think there was a hotfix today. I think I saw where they boosted a power that makes Crimson Vial better, so that might tie into that. I'm not actually sure, though. I think I just saw, like, the headline from Wowhead. I didn't actually read it, but there you go. Anyway, he says he also he also skipped most of the trash and only did the bosses. I think that is something that a lot of us are going to start doing as much as we can very quickly. Yeah, I think that's going to be the way to play the Torghast weekly wings moving forward. We'll see. He found Mistweaver Monk extremely tough because the buffs they got offered to them for Kyrian monks were all buffs to the Steward or to increase spinning crane kicks damage, which means he will struggle on the final boss. Yeah, that's definitely a problem, right? Because it's certainly as a solo player, the last boss is the hard part, right? You can sort of breeze through the whole Torghast wing, then you get to the last boss and they can be extremely dangerous. They can do a ton of damage. It can be very spooky. I found that on my enhancement shaman, for example. I was like, oh, got to the last boss, was like, oh god, this is terrifying. Oh my god, please don't murder me. A poor old Earth Elemental got murdered as well. It got pretty scary, so yeah, there you go. But anyway, guys, that was some insight from a bunch of our players in the guild into how they're finding their specs. Let me know in the comments how you're finding your specs. Again, the sort of question that I asked the guys here was, how are you, like, what's fun about your specs? Is there anything that surprised you in terms of how good it is? Is there anything that's disappointed you? For me, I actually did have something of a disappointment, which was, for me, I guess the positive surprise for me has been Fire Mage being good. That's pretty cool. I'm really happy about that. I played Fire Mage back in Legion, for example. I moved away from Mage for BFA, though, because I felt like it got a bit too simple at the start of BFA. Obviously, it got a lot more complex with Bar of Power. But, like, for example, I hated that Phoenix Flames got removed in BFA. And it's back in Shadowlands, though. But, yeah, the disappointment for me, personally, has been Enhancement Shaman, actually. Has been a disappointment, because I rated as my number 2 melee DPS spec. I've actually found that disappointing when I came to playing it. I think mostly because I went with Necrolord, the Primordial Wave, which I mentioned already. That Covenant ability is insanely good. Oh, it's so much fun for Resto and Elemental. For Resto, it puts a Riptide on a player, makes your next healing wave cast a free healing wave additionally on everyone with a Riptide. For Elemental, it does the same thing. It does a free Flame Shock, and then it does a free Lava Burst on every target with Flame Shock when you cast another Lava Burst. Absolutely insane. For Elemental, for Enhancement, excuse me, it's a complete mess, though. It sucks. It also puts Flame Shock on, but Flame Shock's nowhere near as good for Enhancement as it is for Ellie, or for Resto even, because it doesn't give them procs. Yeah, and then it boosts the power. It makes their next lightning bolt hit everything with a flame shock on it, which is just and it's good in single target, but it totally fucks with the enhancement shaman AoE rotation. Because what are you doing with enhancement shaman and AoE, which is actually very fun, is, well, you're spending your Maelstrom weapon on Chain Lightning, not on Lightning Bolt, on Chain Lightning, which reduces the cooldown on Crash Lightning. It boosts the damage of Crash Lightning. Then you do a Crash Lightning, which boosts your Storm Strike. You do a Storm Strike, it's buffed by Crash Lightning. It hits lots of different enemies, which gives you lots of stacks of Maelstrom weapons, so you can do Chain Lightning. And you weave those through, and then you have the Hailstorm talent, which makes it so that you do a Frost Shock after consuming your Maelstrom weapon, which makes the Frost Shock cleave with a whole bunch of bonus damage. So you got this big rhythm to the thing, and yeah, the Covenant ability is completely... It's... I'm also going to level a Rogue, and I think I'll go through the campaign just to try the Rogue Covenants, because they're kind of notoriously underwhelming. But, yeah, the Necrolord Shaman one, for me, has been weird, because it's so good for Elemental and Resto. Like, it's insanely good, and it's so bad for Enhancement. It just completely conflicts. There's some of my thoughts, though. These were some of my guildies. What do you think, guys? Let me know. Let me know in the comments. I'm very interested to see what you guys have to say. And guys, thank you for watching. I will see you all next time. Have a great weekend. Bye-bye.